Welcome to LG Path Lab's monthly pathology webinar series. Today we have Dr. Rukma Doshi with us, who is a consultant histopathologist at Epsom and St. Heliers Hospital in the United Kingdom. Dr. Doshi's special interests lies in medical renal biopsies, uropathology, and gynae histopathology. Today she is going to speak about her approach to medical renal biopsies, and in a subsequent webinar she'll be doing case-based discussions on medical renal biopsies. Thank you, Dr. Doshi. And
hello everyone. Thank you, Lindsay, for giving me this opportunity. I will be talking about my approach to medical renal biopsy interpretation. This is a topic which is very close to my heart, and I hope you find this useful. Now, before we try to interpret a renal biopsy under the microscope, the most important thing is looking at the clinical details. The renal physicians are quite clued in and give a very detailed history in most cases. The history usually comes in the form of just a normal complete blood count. They may tell you what the blood urea, creatinine levels are. They may tell you how much of protein is there in the urine. That may come in the form of a urine protein creatinine ratio. They may tell you certain serological factors like what are the complement levels, are they increased, are they decreased, are there certain factors like double-stranded DNA which is positive, are ANCA levels positive, etc. All these will help us come to the final diagnosis. Several other clinical details may be preferred also, such as is the ESLO titer raised? Then you start thinking, is it post-infective? Certain hepatitis B, hepatitis C, serological factors, and I also mentioned already C-ANCA, P-ANCA levels may be given to you. Now, after all these clinical details are given to you, you start putting the patient into certain clinical pigeonholes. One of the pigeonhole is nephrotic syndrome, and several diagnoses come under nephrotic syndrome, or several diseases can cause nephrotic syndrome. And I've just laid them down here before you. It's not all inclusive, but these are the most common ones. So it can be from minimal change disease, membranous nephropathy, FSGS diabetes, etc. The next pigeonhole from the clinical context is acute renal failure. And several diseases can lead to acute renal failure. These include thrombotic microangiopathies, acute tubulointerstitial nephritis, acute atherombolism, acute tubular necrosis, post-immune necrotizing GN, amongst others. The next category is just hematuria and nephritis or nephritis, and this includes lupus nephritis, IgA nephropathy, post-immune nephropathy, post-infectious glomerulonephritis, etc. Then the last pigeonhole is chronic renal failure. Now that can be the end stage of all the pathologies that I described before, but can also be seen in certain conditions like chronic tubulointerstitial nephritis, chronic stages of diabetes, etc. So once we worked out which clinical pigeonhole the diagnosis fits in, the next thing is we need to understand what our clients, the nephrologists, want to know. So basically their need is, firstly, of course, what is the diagnosis? What is the cause for all that clinical manifestation that they are noticing in the patient? Next thing is, once you've come to the diagnosis, how active is the disease? Is it in the early stages or is it in the late chronic stages? Once you tell them about the activity of the lesion, the next thing they want to know is about the background. So they want to know whether the tubules have any acute injury in them. This will help them modify how aggressively they treat the lesion. Then the next thing is the background damage very, very minimal or is it very severe? That will also tell them whether they should treat the condition aggressively or they've missed the boat and probably start preparing the patient for dialysis. So At the end of the day, they want to come to the conclusion that is this condition treatable or not. So next, when the renal biopsy comes to the department, the first thing we do is look at it under the dissecting microscope. And when we do that, we are looking for the end with the glomeruli so that we can take a small piece, about 1 by 1 by 1 millimeter, and put it in a glutaraldehyde fixator and save that for electron microscopy examination. Now, some departments do fluorescent microscopy. In that case, the biopsy comes in saline. And when it comes in saline, if there are two cores, one core is saved for fluorescent microscopy and the other core is put into formalin and then processed for light microscopy. Excuse me. Now, once we have separated the cores for electron microscopy and for light microscopy, it is then processed. And once it is processed, it is cut into serial sections and stained into many different stains. So we use the entire army of special stains to help us interpret what is going on in the biopsy. This army includes special stains such as silver, Comores methenamine silver is the commonest one, paradic acid Schiff, MSP stain, which is a trichrome stain, EVG stain, and Congo red stain. All these stains are done as a routine along with H&E stains. The next bit that is used is immunohistochemistry. So again, sections are cut, and as a routine for native kidney biopsies, immunoglobulins like IgM, IgA, IgG are performed, and complement stains such as C1q, C3, C4 is performed for every case along with kappa and lambda light chains. For transplant biopsies, we also do other stains like C40 and polyoma virus stains SV40. So now coming to the crux of it, what do we want to see on the light microscope? So first of all, we need to know what is normal to actually identify what is abnormal. So this is just a cartoon diagram which I've taken from the Atlas of Diagnostic Pathology, AJKD, and that is to give you an idea of a normal glomerulus. So a normal glomerulus contains a hilar pole and a tubular pole. At the hilar pole, you have the afferent and the efferent vessels. The afferent vessels enter and divide into multiple lobules which contain mesangium and capillary loops. Capillary loops are very patent, lined usually by a layer of endothelium cells, and these rest on the basement membrane, which are capped by podocytes. So the filtration unit is this little capillary loop. From this, whatever filtrate passes into the urinary space and then onto the tubule. So what do we see on H&E stain? So we see, again, to recapitulate, this is the hilar pole, and you have the afferent vessel coming in, dividing into lobules, showing capillary loops. Now, normally under the light microscope, you may or may not see the podocytes, but if you do see, great, but usually you don't see them. But the podocytes are usually over here, and that's the basement membrane there. Very patent. The basement membrane is very thin, looks very flexible and very delicate. And outside that, you have the urinary space. And then outside that, you have the Bowman's capsule with the parietal epithelial cells, or the parietal cells lining it. That's usually a single layer and not more than that. The mesangium, the mesangium is quite delicate and very inconspicuous, and where seen, there are not more than 3 cells together there. Now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of special stains that we use to help us in looking at different components of the glomerulus. So, PS stain, paradic acid Schiff stain, is one of them. Now, this is a very, very useful stain to look at the basement membrane. The basement membrane, not only of the capillary loops, but also looking at the basement membrane performance capsule and the basement membrane of the tubules. In a normal tubule, which is not atrophic, it's very thin and very delicate. When it becomes atrophic, it becomes thin and coarse and can be fragmented. The other thing that PS stain can show you is the tubular epithelial brush border. It's intact when the tubules are well functioning and will disappear when there is acute tubular injury. Now, we talk a lot of the glomeruli because a lot of the pathology happens there, but most of the core of the renal biopsy has the background interstitium and the tubules. So that forms more than 90% of the actual biopsy, and the glomeruli are just scattered about. So the tubules that we can identify in the cortex are your proximal tubules and your distal tubules. The proximal tubules have nice, very tall capillary lining, nice, tall lining of cells which are columnar to cuboidal, showing granular cytoplasm and very little lumen visible. On the other hand, the distal tubules contain more cuboidal cells and a very well seen capillary lumen within it. A lumen identified in the center. Now, if we do have medulla included in the renal biopsy, then the tubules look slightly different. They're slightly more spaced out. So, whilst in the cortex, the tubules are back to back in a normal young kidney without much background damage, in the medulla, they're slightly more spaced, slightly more fibrous tissue in between, and more flattened cuboidal lining seen. Now, the other component that we look for in the renal biopsy, so we've talked about glomeruli, we talked about the tubules, we talked about the interstitium. So the interstitium is the material which is in between the tubules and which is very sparse in the normal cortical, in between the normal cortical tubules and slightly more in the medulla. The fourth component that we need to concentrate on is the blood vessels. Now, the normal blood vessels in a young person contain a nice muscle wall and in the arteriole and a nice endothelium, just flush with the media and not much intimacy. Now, the smaller vessels tend to contain more muscle within the walls. This is a slightly larger vessel called the arcuate-sized vessel. Now, to facilitate looking at the amount of damage in the vessels, we use a stain which you can see on the right-hand side, what is the elastic Van Giesen stain, and that highlights any damage within the elastic lamina within the blood vessel. And when it is damaged, it becomes duplicated, maybe 2 layers, maybe more than that. So this is your EVG stain, another routine special stain done. Sorry, I beg your pardon. So another stain that we use is the silver stain. That is really, really useful to again look at the basement membrane, especially of the capillary loops. And when we look at membranous pattern, I will show you how important the stain is in picking up subtle changes within the basement membranes, as well as in certain cases of membranous pattern. The silver stain is also quite nice in looking at the tubular basement membrane. It also may highlight areas of chronic damage where the interstitium is fibrosed. As I mentioned, the last silver special stain that we do along with the MSP is the Congo red stain. This is done to look for any deposits of amyloid. Sometimes they can be very subtle, so it's done in a routine in our lab. The other stain that we do is the trichrome stain, which is the Marsh's scarlet blue in our laboratory, and which stains different components differently, which we'll come to in details in the next table. So this table gives you how to look at each special stain and how to interpret it. So the basement membrane stains different hues in different staining special stains used. So in the case of PS, it's red in color. With your silver stain, it is black in color. With Mazons trichrome, depending on what 3 stains we use, it can be deep blue in color, etc. So please look at this table and try to see what component stains what color. Now, as I mentioned earlier, as soon as the sample comes to the laboratory, we take a little piece for electron microscopy. And this is how the normal electron microscopy looks at. So just to get you orientated so that in future webinars, you'll understand what we're looking at when it's actually pathological. So this area is the mesangium, and these are the normal mesangial cells. Normally it's not very expanded, delicate, and does not contain any deposits. Next, we move on to the capillary loops. So the capillary loops, as I mentioned, they contain, sorry, I beg your pardon, they are lined inside by endothelial cells. You can see a larger magnification here. So these are endothelial cells, and you can see that they have a fenestrated lining to facilitate diffusion of material, phased material outside. So there are areas of gaps through which ultrafiltration can occur. This rests on a basal membrane which contains 3 layers: a lamina lucida interna and externa, and a lamina densa, which is in between these two. And outside this, capping all this, is your porocyte, and that contains nice finger-like processes which rest on the basement membrane. And this is how the normal porocyte looks. When the food processes get fused, it is pathological. So normally the food processes, these finger-like processes, are very well maintained and interdigitate around them. And after that, outside this is your urinary space. So that's the normal EM appearance. Now, before we talk about pathology in the renal biopsy, you need to know that we will use certain terms. So we'll use diffuse pattern. So that means when I use the word diffuse, what I mean is most glomeruli or all glomeruli, or at least more than 50% of the glomeruli are involved by the pathology. When I use the word focal, I mean that about 50% or less of the glomeruli are involved by the pathology. If I use the term global, then I mean that the entire glomerulus, so now we've come to the level of a single glomerulus, so that glomerulus, the entire glomerulus globally is involved. When I use the term segmental, then in that one glomerulus, part of the glomeruli is involved, not the entire glomeruli. Then there are other terminologies like the mesangium shows hypercellularity. By that I mean there are 4 or more mesangial cells in a particular area, in a particular lobule away from the hilum. When I use the term crescent, I will mean that there is increase in the number of cells which line the Bowman's capsule, and that should be more than 2, involving more than 10% of the circumference of the Bowman's capsule. So that's your crescent. Now the crescent can be cellular if it has more than 75% of cells, it can be fibrous if it has more than 75% fibrous, and fibrocellular if it's in between these two. When I use the term endocapillary proliferation, I mean that there is increase in number of cells within the capillary loops. Now this increase can be due to endogenous capillary cells proliferating or due to some exogenous cells coming like inflammatory cells. So there are lots of pathologies which can hit the kidneys, but the kidney tends to react in a limited number of ways. In some conditions, though the patient is showing a lot of clinical features, you might find the glomeruli is completely normal. So that is why the clinical details are so important. And I cannot stress on how important they are on reaching the final diagnosis. The next way the kidney reacts is by producing a pattern, what we call membranoproliferate. Another pattern of reaction is membranous. Then there are several others like diffuse proliferative, membranoproliferative, acute necrotizing, crysenteric, and nodular. So you've noted that I've used the term pattern because several different pathologies can produce a membranoproliferative pattern. So when I use the term membranoproliferative pattern, I don't mean any particular pathology as such. I just mean that that is the appearance that I can see under the microscope. And once I've seen this appearance under the microscope, I again look at the clinical details, look at the other special stains, immunostains, and then come to the final diagnosis. So just to give you a hint, a membranous pattern can be seen in a primary membranous glomerulopathy where the patient has circulating factors causing membranous disease. It can be seen as a part of the pattern in lupus nephritis. It can also be seen in patients who have certain conditions like malignancies. They can all produce with a membranous pattern. So the membranous pattern itself just means it's a particular appearance under the microscope, and it does not mean the pathology in itself. So once we establish what the appearance is or what pattern there is, which I'll show you some pictures of very soon, then we tend to look at what is the deposition of the immunohistochemical stains. So if they deposit in the mesangium, if they deposit along the capillary loops, etc., they all have a different meaning. And what is depositing and how much is depositing and what is the combination of immunoglobulins and complement components all help us to reach the final diagnosis. And we'll go into details in a while once we have come to different pathologies in the different webinars to follow. Now, again, as I said, electron microscopy is the other armament in our diagnostic portfolio, which helps us decide what the pathology is. And there we are again looking for electron-dense deposits or fibrillary deposits to help us decide what the pathology is. So moving on, as I mentioned before, we tend to classify glomerulonephritis into these following patterns. So let's go into details or look at just the patterns without going into more details of what has caused this. So first, let's try to understand and see what the diagnostic criteria for each pattern is. So the first pattern on the left-hand side is your FSGS pattern or the focal segmental glomerulosclerosis. So we already went through the terminology. It is a focal pathology, so it does not involve all the glomeruli, and it is segmental. So it does not involve the entire glomerulus. So when we look at this glomeruli, there is an area which looks very solid. So this is a normal bit of the glomeruli, and this is the solid bit of the glomeruli where there is deposition of collagen and there is fusion with the Bowman space here, hyalinosis, and you can't see the structure of the capillary loops. And there's an area of sclerosis or fibrosis in the glomeruli. Again, does not tell you what the cause is, just a pattern which you need to recognize, or FSGS pattern. Next, on the right-hand side, you have the endocapillary or the membranoproliferative pattern. So in this pattern, you have proliferation, which is both endocapillary and mesangial. So we look at the mesangium, there are more than 4 cells lying next to each other, which is abnormal. The mesangium also looks more prominent, so we can easily recognize it. When we start to look at the capillaries, this area looks very busy. So we've looked at a normal glomerulus, and we've seen the capillary loops are nice, widely patent, but it's not the case here. They seem to be full of cells. So that's your endocapillary or membranoproliferative pattern. The next pattern is your necrotizing and crysenteric pattern. So on the right right-hand side is your necrotizing pattern. So here I'm using one of the special stains. So I'm using the MSP stains to demonstrate the necrosis. So there is a lot of fibrin here, which is destroying the glomeruli, completely shattering the capillary loops with a lot of karyorrhexis. All these blue dots here are karyorrhexis. And that is your area of necrosis here. So what is the crescentric pattern? As I mentioned, in the normal Bowman's capsule, there was just a single layer lining it. When this layer becomes more than 2 cell thick and is involving at least 10% of circumference, we call it a crescent. So this here, marked by the green arrows and also by the blue arrows, are your crescents here. And as I mentioned, they can be cellular, fibrocellular, or a combination of both. The next pattern is your mesangial-proliferative or mesangial hypercellularity, where just the mesangium is expanded and the number of cells are more than 4 together. But the capillary loops look patent, look normal, don't show too many cells within the lumen inside them. So that's your mesangial-proliferative pattern. The other pattern is your membranous pattern. Now this tends to spare the mesangium in most cases unless it's very advanced, and tends to involve just the capillary loop basement membrane. This basement membrane tends to become thickened. So it's no longer delicate and tends to stand out and looks rigid. So if you look at about 10 o'clock, very rigid, thick membranes are there, but the capillary loops are still patent and no increase in cellularity is seen. To facilitate looking at this pattern, we use the silver stain, and this we are looking for spikes on the basement membrane or small bubbles. And this tells us it's a membranous pattern. We already talked about the membranoproliferative, but just to give you another example. So again, we looked at the mesangium, it is expanded and there is increase in cellularity in the capillary loops also. So once we have put the changes that we see under the light microscopy into a particular pattern, we need to come to a primary diagnosis. Now that was remember the first need of a nephrologist. So what is the diagnosis? So looking at the pattern, looking at the clinical details, we marry the two together and we come with a primary diagnosis. So if it's a membranoproliferative pattern, patient has hematuria only, then we start thinking this IgA glomerulonephritis. Of course, the immunostains also need to show deposition of IgA. We'll go into more details in the next webinars that I will be posting soon. So once we come to the primary diagnosis, as life, it's not always very simple, and sometimes there is a second pathology which can be present along with the primary diagnosis. So certain chronic conditions can be superimposed by another pathology. So keep in mind, the patient may be diabetic and can still develop IgA nephropathy. So we need to keep in mind that there may be a secondary diagnosis like diabetes, ischemic glomerulonephritis, etc. there, and need to be mindful and include that in the report. Now, as I mentioned, the clinician wants to know how much chronic damage has happened in the background, so how much tubular atrophy has already occurred, so that they know that is it early in the disease and the kidney is still relatively healthy and they can aggressively go in there and treat it, or is it very damaged end-stage kidney and probably not much point in treating this and preparing the patient for dialysis and possibly transplant in the future. So the chronic changes we are looking for is there glomerulosclerosis? So we need to tell them if there is just segmental glomerulosclerosis, how many glomeruli are there? Is it extensive? Is it limited? If it's global glomerulosclerosis, we tend to give a count. So if there are 20 glomeruli seen, of these, only one is globally sclerosed or 20 are globally sclerosed. So you can see it makes a difference, telling them how much chronic damage there is. Next, the chronic damage we look at is in the tubules. How much tubular atrophy there is, and in the interstitial, how much interstitial fibrosis there is. We also look at the blood vessels to look for how much chronic damage there is, how much arteriosclerosis there is, duplication of the lamina, expansion of the intima, etc. Certain classification systems which are used for certain pathologies have a built-in way of reporting these chronic changes, such as the Oxford classification system has a built-in T-score and segmental sclerosis score, and there is a similar scoring pattern which is used in your lupus nephritis. So when we look at the background, we're trying to estimate whether there is mild, moderate, or severe damage, and it's arbitrarily divided into less than 25, 25 to 50, or more than 50%. And we tend to come to a decision. Just keep in mind and find out that in your lab, what system is used. So as I mentioned, the first system was mild, moderate, severe. Others may use a scoring system like 2 to 4, 5 to 7, and more than 8 to tell you whether it's mild, moderate, and severe. So be mindful of what is used. So in short, that is the basic of renal biopsy interpretation, and just a very, very quick introduction. I will post more webinars going into more details of pathologies, showing you more examples, and I hope you find them useful. Thank you very much. And just for further reading, to give you a simple introduction, please look up this paper. Thank you so much. And again, thank you to LG Path for giving me this opportunity to present this webinar.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rukma, for your lovely presentation. If our viewers have any questions, please leave your comments in the comment section, and Dr. Doshi will get back to you as soon as possible. Dr. Rukma will look forward to your next presentation on case-based discussions on medical renal biopsies, and thank you so much.